Yeah, so organizational culture. This is kind of a difficult topic, not really to talk about so much. It is a little bit to think about, right? So we've talked with people who were like in our circles or maybe on interviews, and there's been questions about culture, and maybe we've asked, right? Like, so what kind of culture do you have here? And they answer back, well, it's a good one. Well, how good? Oh, it's real good. So that's a little bit where I was a few years ago. I was having a conversation with a friend, and we were talking about culture, and it's like, well, so let's what are the things that make culture, right? So we're going to talk about what's culture, what's lean culture. There are some things about that. We're going to look at a model, talk a little bit about why it matters, and how do we use that kind of information. So again, what is culture? It's good. It's real good. It's motherhood, right? So we're going to go through and we'll talk a little bit about, so what is it? So we've gone to the experts at Wikipedia and asked them, what are the things about culture out there, right? So here, highlighted red, knowledge, belief, art, morals, laws, customs, right? The practices, it's the things we do, and it's like, okay, well that's kind of motherhood stuff, right? In the dictionary it talks about, again, beliefs, customs of society or a group, thinking, behaving, or working. Okay, well that's getting a little closer. That's a little bit closer. Business Dictionary, again, talks a little bit about responses of the group in our organization. What's acceptable or unacceptable, right or wrong, important, not important, those type of things. Again, assumptions, beliefs, knowledge. Right? So Texas A&M, they had a long list of definitions, right? So if you really want to try to nail down a definition, I think they had all of them, but basically they talked around the learned behavior of a group, the interactions, right? And so Dr. Hofstede, he was a consultant for IBM and took a look at what was going on, and this is from the early 70s. What were some of the things that's going on, and how do they interact across their different groups? They were deployed not just in the U.S., they were in Europe and a few other places at the time. But part of his study was going in and looking at how do we improve some of these interactions between the different groups. So part of the study he did, and a definition, collective programming of the mind. Okay. So a lot of this is trying to drive, again, we see that behavior of groups, put these together, some of these common topics that come out, groups, behaviors, values, knowledge, actions, symbols, right? These things make up culture. But again, it's we're still talking about motherhood, right? What are these? How do we deal with this? If we know that we need to make changes in an organization, how do we use this kind of information to help us? So what is lean culture, right? So here's a typical depiction of, some people take Toyota's House of Lean, right? This model, and try to go in and adapt it for what they need. But so here we see customer focused value, the two pillars, just in time and Jidoka, and along the foundation here we have communication, respect for people, right? So this should be something that we may be a little bit familiar with. Right? And so what are these things that were going on in here? And so these begin to talk about, right, how do we think about a lean culture, one that one that facilitates continuous improvement and customer value, customer focus. So it is, this lean culture is based on the how we act within these principles, right? So the principles: specify value by product, identify all the steps in the value stream, remove the waste, right? Make value flow. Customer pulls value, and then we stop and we look and say, are we moving forward? Are we doing better meeting customer expectations, right? And so in here, it's not really it's not just so much the process, right, that we're doing, that we transform raw material or information into these products, but it's also the management system around that, or it's the system around that. And you just can't change one piece and then we're good. So how do we go through and use this thinking, and how do we drive this into our systems? So in here, when we talk about a lean culture, some of the things that really come out a lot are leadership, communication, and empowerment and teamwork. Right? So in here, I put in some of these key words that we saw before from the definitions. Right? So now we're starting to see, well, if we're talking about behaviors and actions and how we think and how we interact with the group, right? We see there's a component of that leadership has. There's certainly communication function to this, and it's not just so much how the communicate flows down from leadership, but also how does it flow up? How does it flow across? How do we interact with each other within the different smaller groups within an organization? And then the empowerment and teamwork. Those who are doing the work, can they change the work? Can they go do the things that they need to do to improve the flow? Right? It's not so much that you're going to have the lean guy come in there, or the consultant, whoever it is, and come in and make the changes, and everybody's going to be happy and going with it, right? And so how do they, are the people that's in the place doing the work, can they change the work? And how do they interact with each other? So when we take a look at leadership, three things that come out of there, right? Respect for people, we saw that in the House of Lean. Clarity of the vision, clarity of communication, where are we going, and these shared values, right? In communication, we want to see things like, is it clearly, frequently, consistently, right? Is that message getting out there? Is the message going up and down and across? And then in for the empowerment and teamwork, again, right, we're talking about people doing the work, and they make change in the things that they're doing. So here we've gone through and a little bit of definition for lean culture, right? And so we need to ask, how are we shaping culture? We don't really change it, right? It's not like it's turn knobs. It's not like a design of experiment. But it is, there are things that we do and how we treat each other and how we interact that will shape part of that. So if we could, how could we measure it and influence it? So again, talk about Dr. Hofstede. He has a couple of models. One is about national culture, which takes a look between countries. And he's also got an organizational culture that's a little bit closer to where are we on a daily basis. So when we talk about that it's good, it's really good. Does anybody have to live here? I hope not. This is not. And again, here's another example of good, really good, right? The competition for resources, the infighting, and the empowerment, right? You're empowered to do what we tell you to do. That's not really how that works. So one of the things Dr. Hofstede did, and this is from his book, Cultures and Organizations, and I'm not a Hofstede person, but I was exposed to some of this, and how do we make those connections, right? So there were 6 things that he talks about, and so process oriented, and a lot of this is done in the comparison of each other, right? So it compares. Do we have a process oriented organization, or is it a results oriented? Is it employee versus job, parochial versus professional, open versus closed systems, loose tight control, pragmatic and normative? So it gives us something to kind of talk about. How do we, again, these are behaviors, these are actions, these are parts of communication. And so the first one is organizational effectiveness, right? Are we process oriented or are we results oriented? And again, when he's got Dr. Hofstede's got a test you can go take if you want to do that sort of thing, and you kind of see where you are, but it's not really one or the other. Most of us fit within the middle, right? Well, we are both, right? So there's some scaling going on in there, but again, with the process culture, we're talking about the way, right? Are we more concerned with how something is done, or is it results based where we're looking at, what was the outcome of all of those hows? What's most important? Or how important are those, right? And so in here, in a lean culture, what we see in here, we see leadership, communication, empowerment. We see those 3 main pillars of lean culture. Next one is the organization employee focused or is it job focused, right? And so in here, we're taking a look at, is the organization focused on the employee? I don't really want to say it's a kind of a feeling thing, but it's like the welfare of the employee, is the employee taken care of, and those type of things. The work oriented is heavy on the pressure to perform task, right? So we've seen those before. In here, how in a lean culture, how do we shape this? A lot of it's through leadership and communication. The next one's like parochial versus professional, and it talks about where do we, as a group or as an individual, really, where do we draw our identity from, right? So here we see on the first one, professional is determined by profession, right? So when 2 guys meet, right, shake hands, hi, my name is John, right, and the very first question is, what do you do? Right? It's almost like saying hello, but it's a lot of it. That's what driven by profession. The other one is determined by the group. What groups do you belong to? Right. So it's another way of thinking. So the parochial has got a strong social connection to it, right? And so where do leaders, how do they shape this? Again, this is through leadership and empowerment. That teamwork makes a big draw to, can influence this. When we're looking at, when we go in and make changes, there is a professional part of it that's needed in teams, right? You need you need the different types of stuff knowers, right? So if we're in solving a problem, are we looking at, is this a problem in accounting, right? So do we have enough smart people in there that can talk about parts of the system? And I don't mean the accounting system, but the system of how we do work. Next is open system, closed system, and we're talking about the group's approachability, right? So in an open system, people immediately feel like they're part of the team or part of the family. In a closed system, we see where that takes longer to happen, if at all, right? So in here, some of the lean components of this were, obviously leadership, communication, empowerment, But in here, one thing that could influence this is really how do we go through and how do you bring someone into the organization. I don't mean the HR functions, but once they actually land within the team, what are some of the things that are going on? All right, tight control versus loose control, and here we're talking about like process control or discipline. Discipline really means kind of like repeatability, right? Do we have a method for people? So with a loose control, you know, there's this sounds very scary, right? Lack of predictability and very little control. If you took a look nationally where the U.S. is, this really isn't where we are at a national level. Certainly, organizations that are risk averse, they will not be loosely controlled. In a tight control here, we see some of the examples: cost conscious, start on time. You know, the old rule of if you want to end on time, you got to start on time. Those type of things, right? And so here we see some influence again from leadership, communication, and empowerment and teamwork. Normative versus pragmatic, and here we're talking about how are we aligned to the customer, right? So normative, we're really talking about it's heavily drawn on like internal rules that we have. Here the example is business ethics, absolutely important. On the far end of the scale, normative will be, you know, at the risk of, you know, of the results. So we stay within our ethical, and nothing else matters, right? So on the other end of that scale, pragmatic is a little more. Some of the terms you might hear with that might be, well, a little more of a common sense approach to meeting customer needs, no matter what all those rules are that we see hanging on the walls, right, from time to time. Right? Results are most important, right? And so a big component of this, again, how does leadership act? How do they think? How's the communication? And what are the teams really empowered to do? So why does any of this matter, right? So here we're talking about when we're going in and we use this kind of thinking and we use these, we're looking for transformation, right? How do we go from our current state into our future state? Now, I've been in places where it was difficult to implement. I've seen different programs in the years that I've been in aerospace where some parts of the organizations just didn't seem to get it, right? And others took the concepts and ran with it and are very successful. But how do we go in and do that? Well, we see things, again, we see behavior, beliefs, actions, responses, and in here, in culture, is a feedback mechanism, right? If we're getting the actions and the results that we're really looking for, you know, there will be ways that how we act and how we treat each other are kind of cemented in. But if we're not getting what we need, there's a feedback loop in there, and a lot of people will respond with that at a personal level, at a group level. And it's that knowledge and experience that will shape some of that. So, 4 kind of questions that we're looking at here. Where are we going? How do we get there? Who's going with us? And how do we relate with each other? Because as we're trying to make our organizations respond to customer demand quicker, smoother, how do we give them what we want? How do we know that we've given them what they want? right? There's these things, these play together. So when we're looking at lean transformation in here, again, we have the three lean culture components. I mean, they're not the only three, but those are the three biggies. And so how do we go in and relate with each other? Now here's the deal. With this is a test, and you have a group take the test, and they'll send you a response. And but there's not really dial settings. There's not a number target that you're trying to hit on these 6 components. Even if your organization can go to 11, when you need that one more, right? Spinal Tap. There's not really each organization's a little different. Each industry is different. Customers are different. You know, who are you selling your product or service to? And so, how do we adapt? That is it. So, we take this information. And there's some things we need to remember. Number one, flow is absolutely the number one thing. Because all around these improvements that we're making and the things that we're changing, right? It's about how do we get that product closer and closer to the customer without it stopping. So some of the things we use, and-ons, right? Is anybody here using and-ons in your operation? That's the thing that says, hey, flow is stopped and we need help. Right? In manufacturing, one of the scariest concepts is stop the line. We're not stopping the line for anybody. Well, that line's going to stop whether you want it to or not. Right? So the and-on is the thing that signals for help, right? To get enough of the smart people who we can solve the problem and get to going again. Smart people, this is a concept where the smart people are the people doing the work, right? Kaizen, again, making small steps to improve, whether it's these quality problems that we have, or whether it's inventory problems we have, flow of information, those types of things, right? Again, using the smart people to help fix those problems. Kakaku, big change, right? We're going to move all the lines. We're going to put everything in a one-line standard flow, so we can utilize one-piece flow. We're going to bust down all the monuments, right? You know what monuments are? It's usually where we have machines bolted to the floors. Big machines, not the little ones, but or big data centers. Right? Where do we hide all this information? That's all out there. Hoshikonri. This is a concept of kind of management planning. Right? Where are we going? What's the again? Leadership's got a big role to play in this. And so do the rest of us throughout the organization. But is that being communicated? Is that being, are we using enough of the right kinds of people to develop that? And are we using leader standard work, right? The SOPs and standard work and those type of things are not just for people doing the transformative work, but also there's things that the leaders do on a daily basis, weekly, monthly, annually. We make sure that we don't forget, or make sure that we do it right. Because the further between time that we do some sort of task, do we really need to remember all those things, all those steps? Well, I do it once a year. So how do we do that, right? 5S. How many here are from factories? Right? So how many of you learned that 5S was the thing you did at the end of the day? Right? The last 5 minutes, boss says, all right, everybody 5S your areas. Really, you might be doing 1S. 5S is really about organization. Right? Do we have the clutter out of the way? Do we know where things belong? Do we keep things in a like new condition so we can see when something's gone wrong? Or is that repeatable? Is boss paying attention? Right? Helping us to make sure that we haven't forgotten something. In there, kind of a new concept, or at least new to me, the word obeya. I don't like to throw around a lot of Japanese words when we talk about lean, but this one keeps coming up, and you may see it out there in the writings of what's going on in lean. But really, it's a war room, and in there we'll have metrics, and we'll have kind of current state information about where we are in developments of products. Lots of other information. Workplace organization, point of use. Are the things that we're using all the time, are they as close as possible? Right? Are we able to quickly change over? Right? Now I know that that one of the things that we are plagued with is quality. Quality in the information flow. And so how do we go through and because we'll work on something until we find a problem, and then we've got to unfortunately throw it back over the wall. Okay, you guys need to fix this, and then send it back, and we'll do that a few times until whoever's inspecting quality into that document is happy with it. But so how fast can we change over from one task to the next? And it's not all just manufacturing stuff, right? Got to get oriented. Where was I? Open up whatever systems, find whatever information you look for. Balance the work, right? So when we're going through, is there, are we spending, I don't want to say it's just only about an equal effort, between team members on a product, but how do we go through and adjust that so we got predictable output, right? So the visual controls, hook a yoke, ask it why, right? So these things help us to organize work, organize the information, organize our tools. And here we go. So the Stockdale paradox. Admiral Stockdale was a POW in Vietnam. And one of the things that helped him kind of get through that, you must never confuse faith that you will prevail in the end, which you can never afford to lose, with the discipline to confront the most brutal facts of your current reality, whatever they may be. Now, there are going to be problems that pop up in our flow, and so it's a lot of that is how do we respond to that? And a lot of times leadership will drive some of that. How they act will kind of flow down through the organization. How we communicate with each other, right? Up, down, and across. And what are the teams? What are the team expectations of the teams? What do they do? What can they do? How do they treat each other? How do they treat across different teams? How does the accounting team, how do they interact with the finance team? And are there any questions? I know this is a deep and heady subject. What I hope that you got from this is this model, and I'll go back to it. The model on the here we go. Kind of the 6 dimensions. Any questions? Yes?
So can you use lean in any of those cultures, or do you have to make changes always?
That is a good question. Yeah, you can implement lean in where these are. Some places may be a little harder than others, and that's some of the things we run into. There are some cultures that are probably there are some that are very regimented and locked in place and take a very long time, and so you still have to adapt your approaches and and implementation, I don't want to say of tools, it's not really about tools, but at least of the thinking that's involved that drives the actions that we're, as we're trying to meet customer expectations, customer demand, those type of things. So, and eventually there'll be shifts in culture, and so how do we adapt to that? So it's always, there's always that change element. So it's not like once you get your culture fixed, it's good forever. One of the things that I was involved in several years ago was a coming together of two organizations, two external organizations. In fact, we were competitors, and that was very interesting to see some of those dynamics at work, right? And so there's lots of reasons why cultures can change. You know, that's a big one. That's a big one. But but at least gives us something to think about, right? As opposed to how sometimes we've dealt with quality in the past. So how's quality? Oh, it's good. How good? Oh, it's real good, right? And so at least with quality, we can talk about specifications or requirements or those type of things. And so these models, like Dr. Hofstede, and there's lots more out there. And some of them kind of talk around each other, and some of them are kind of vastly different. And but at least gives us a place to have that conversation and think about, well, where's our organization, and how do we, where would we like for it to be? And I'm not saying just really for lean implementation or lean transformation, but that is a little part of it also. So, thank you. Anything else?
Does the Hofstede model talk about ideal state and versus yang, process-oriented, results-oriented, or just kind of gives facts about
it gives some facts about how to think about it. Not that, I don't think he really talks about this is the best one. Because our situations will be different. And a lot of this will interact with national culture also. So how do we as an organization, let's say we want to move into a developing nation, right? We want to set up some operations in India, right? India is India is definitely an up and coming place, and a lot of people are seeing opportunity there. And how could we serve those potential customers there, potential people there? And so there are, how do we interact in that? Because we don't want to make them mad, right? And go in and do something that either insults them or it would be good to know what are some of what's kind of our operating boundaries, right? Especially for Americans, because we're a little more on the tight control side. Helps with risk management and those type of things. And so what's really the best? How do we go through and develop things that they need, right? No matter whatever type of customer base you're moving into. Developed economies, undeveloped economies, or emerging economies. So I hope I answered your question. Okay. Sometimes it sounds like that I'm dancing around the questions a lot.
Got a question. On
Yes.
each of these, not one is necessarily better than the other, right?
Right.
Except when I look at the first one, process versus results oriented, you really want to be both, right? It's just the way your organization is currently leaning towards.
Right. So there are places, and I'm sure that for whatever type of industry or product or organization that you're in, that you could get a big enough sample to say where does the organization need to be on this kind of scale? Now, the other thing is, I didn't talk about it too much, but there are interactions between these, especially between, like if we took a look at, process-oriented and versus, control. Right? There are definite interactions in there, and so it's not like when you start thinking that you're influencing one, that you're not influencing the others. And one of the things that Dr. Hofstede talks about with his book is, or not the book, but the test you can take online. He says, we can't be held responsible if you break your organization. Well, that's a bold statement, and but it's certainly out there. It's a good way to learn about people and kind of that interaction with psychology, and and how do we not turn our organizations into one where everybody jumps ship, and that's really what that's kind of talking about. And we've seen those organizations, we hear about them, they show up in the news. Sometimes we hear about CEOs who get drug in front of Congress, and a couple days later they are out. Right? We know that happens. We get to see that play out. So, I hope I answered your question, but there's not really a number that you need to hit kind of for each one of these. There might be bands. It really depends on what kind of organization you're trying to run. Any others? All right. Well, thank you very much. Appreciate it.